My number one tip for building a better mana base in Limited is to simply pick lands higher. If you have access to more lands, you will have a better ability to construct a consistent mana base to facilitate casting your spells and splashing colors. It simply makes your deck a lot more consistent, a lot more smooth. You lose less games to Mana Screw, and overall taking lands higher is one of the biggest level ups that you can have as a Limited player, especially in a set that incentivizes you to play 3 colors or to splash more heavily. Hello everybody, and welcome to this video where I'm going to be providing you with 5 tips for how to build better mana bases in Limited. You've already heard number 1, but I'm about to get to the other 4. Before I do though, I want to remind you, if you enjoy this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more draft content. Let's move on to tip number 2, and that is to choose main colors to focus on and then have a color that is lighter or a splash, and potentially if you're splashing multiple colors, have multiple colors be splash colors. So the way you can define a main color is if you have like a bulk of your cards in that color, and when you have a main color, you're going to want to have 8 or more sources of that color. That's why typically in a limited set that you're playing 2 colors, the default mana base is 9/8. Because that gives you 8 sources of each of your main colors with your 17 land mana base. However, in a set where you're incentivized to splash, you're going to want to make sure that you have 8 sources of both of your main colors and then access to 3 colors of any splash that you are going to have if you're splashing 1 card, and then if you're splashing 2 cards, you usually go up to 4 sources. 3 cards, you oftentimes want to slowly increase it from there, so like 4 or 5 sources for 3 cards, and so forth. So you're going to want to make sure that you have access to 8 sources of each main color, and then by using non-basic lands and things of that nature, you can oftentimes facilitate having 3 or more sources of a color for each splash. And so just making sure you know what your main colors are, like blue, black, splashing red, or something of that nature, is really going to help you when you are determining how to build your deck, because it's going to let you choose which color you're going to have early drops in, because you're only going to have consistent mana in your main color. So you want to make sure all of your early drops are in those main colors. And then you're also going to want to make sure that if you are splashing a card, that you have the sources that you need to cast it. Speaking of splashing, we're going to move on to tip number 3, and that is to splash cards that have late game impact. Splashing a 2-drop is not going to be very effective because, due to the fact that you have so many fewer sources of that color, you're not going to be able to consistently cast it on the early turn that it is built for. If you're casting your 2-drops consistently on turn 7, they're going to have lost a lot of the value that they could have gained by coming down on turn 2 and gaining you all of the advantages that a 2-drop can accrue for you. So if you are going to splash a card, make sure it has some late game significance, stuff like removal spells, strong rares, creatures that can end the game, things of that nature are worth splashing. And so those are the sorts of cards that you need to make sure that if you're going to be casting them on turn 7 or so, when you're going to have your access to your 3rd color consistently, you need to make sure that the cards are still relevant. Speaking of splashing, we're moving on to tip number 4. There are a lot of tips that have to do with splashing when it is coming to building a limited mana base, and this tip is simply don't splash double pipped cards. It is one of the biggest ways to just never be able to cast your spells. Even if they look appealing, even if they look powerful, it is just very difficult to splash a double pipped card outside of very specific circumstances that are so niche that I don't even want to talk about them, because everyone's going to just want to jump on the bandwagon and say that it's that situation, even though it's not. Just don't splash double pipped cards and you will see a drastic improvement, because getting to 2 sources of a color can be difficult even when you have those 8 or 9 sources of that color. And so getting to 2 pips of a color is just almost impossible a lot of the time if you only have 3, 4, or 5 sources of that color. So just don't splash double pipped cards. They are very powerful a lot of the time, but if you are going to want to play one of those, just make sure that it falls within one of your main colors, and that maybe you just have that as your main color and then you splash a different color if you really want to play all of those cards. So don't splash double pipped cards. It may look appealing, but it is not going to help you overall. And then the final tip that I have is that if you need to play an extra land, feel free to do so. If you have an 18 land mana base, it's not going to be the end of the world, especially if you have lands that can help you mitigate flood in the late game. Maybe they can activate to scry, maybe you can sacrifice them to draw a card, as is the case with some of the lands in New Capenna. But make sure that you have good mana, and if you have to play an 18th land, it's not the end of the world, especially if your deck is slower or really just wants to hit land drops to cast expensive spells. Having an extra land can be a game-changing thing, even though it oftentimes is easy to just fall into the play 17 lands, 23 spells. Sometimes you need to be able to break from the norm. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video on how to build better mana bases. I've seen a lot of people that say they don't feel confident building a mana base because it just seems too complicated or like too much math, but hopefully this video has been of some use to you if you find yourself in that situation, and hopefully you've got at least a couple of the tips to help you improve. If you did enjoy the video, in the comment section down below, leave which tip you found the most helpful. Remember to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more content, and I will talk to you next time.